Max Verstappen is the best driver on the grid. I look at Max now as a really complete driver. He is a great human until it's mathematically impossible to win a championship. The mentality won't change.
Hello and welcome back to the Inside Track with me, sports journalist Matt Majendie. I'm pleased to say we're joined by former Red Bull mechanic and team ambassador Calum Nicholas. And with 3 weekends of the season left in Las Vegas, Qatar and Abu Dhabi, we want to hear from someone who knows Max so well. Hi Calum, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
I wanted to start with Max, and it's been slightly bonkers, this kind of post-summer renaissance he's had. It looked like he was kind of dead and buried, but now we've had this sort of great string of results. I wonder what you thought was behind it. Is it the Max factor? Is it Laurent? Is it the engineers working on the RB21 and all the upgrades?
Look, I think all in all, and I've said this time and again, if you want to win and you want to go out there and compete, it's about everything. Right, it's not just about the car, and obviously we knew we had some issues with the car at the beginning of the year that we've been working through, and but it just takes to bring everything together. So I think it's multifaceted. I think Max, obviously he's Max, right, and he's put in some incredible performances. I mean, watching what he did in Brazil this year, as well as obviously being there last year, time and time again, he's shown that if you give him the equipment, he'll pull out the results. But yeah, look, I think there's a lot of factors. The car will have been part of it, getting everybody else sort of swimming in the right direction. It was a tough start to the year, and that's where we've been good. It's been a great season in terms of building and progressing from where we started.
What is it? Everyone's, we see the brilliance. You talked about Brazil as a good example. What is it that, having seen him up close and personal, that makes him so good? Is it one thing or?
I think there's a raw talent that's always been there. I think 2016, I'll never forget that race in Barcelona, where he jumped in the car and ended up holding off, Kimi for all those laps when he had really old tyres. I think it was very clear from the beginning that the raw skill and talent was there. But, I've had the great pleasure of watching Max learn every other aspect of the sport that he's improved in, like his racecraft now, his calm, his ability to manage so many other things, including all of the media. And I know those aren't things that he particularly likes doing, is all the media and all of that stuff. But, he's learned to manage it. And now he does everything so well. I often say that, I look at Max now as a really complete driver. He's learned from those around him. He's learned from his past experiences. He's grown with the team, and it's been a real pleasure to watch that.
There's been some amazing kind of moments from him. He talks about the highs and lows of this season, amazing moments. Is there one for you that stands out from him this year?
Look, I think overall it's the resilience. You find yourself in these tough situations, and that's what it takes, is resilience to sort of have the resurgence that we've seen in the second half of the season. Brazil will stand out. I think Brazil, just being in that situation, being so unhappy one day, making huge change, and not just for Max. Max's drive was phenomenal, but also for the team. Like everyone forgets that when you make that choice to then start from a pit lane and overhaul a car, that's a long Saturday for you. That's a lot of work that goes into that, and it ripples through the whole team. So to sort of see that is one thing, and I think Brazil stands out for me in that respect.
It's quite a Red Bull moment, wasn't it? To be, that in-weekend development. I don't know if you had sympathy for your former teammates with what they were going through.
Absolutely. Do you know what? I've been saying this a lot lately. This is the time of year where you do need to have real sympathy for everyone in the garage. Especially going into this race. The first of what is a triple header on paper, but in reality is the best part of 4 weeks away by the time you've done the test, the postseason test. So yeah, this is definitely a time to think of your mechanics and technicians that are out there making the sport happen at this time. It really is a grueling time of year.
I've got to say, they were looking pretty upbeat, but maybe it's because there's still a sniff of hope of a championship, I guess, or just however small.
Well, I think the mentality won't change from them, right? And it doesn't matter how tired you are, how close to the end of the year you are. The mentality won't change until it's physically impossible, until it's mathematically impossible to win a championship. Everyone in that garage will do absolutely whatever they can to achieve it. Even if you might feel in Abu Dhabi like you are on the ground and you're finished, but that's the personalities and the mentality if you have of those people. And I know you've spoken to quite a few of our team this year, and that's all of their mentality is straight away is whatever it takes, we'll do it. It doesn't matter what it means for us. We'll find that energy to keep going.
Can I see a hint of it that you miss it, or do you miss parts of it, or?
I absolutely, I miss little bits of it. I certainly miss the adrenaline of pit stops. Pit stops was one of the things that first enticed me into wanting to work in motorsport. So I certainly miss that as a bit of an adrenaline rush. And at times, I'm lucky. I only live down the road from the factory, and I still spend plenty of time there doing other stuff for Red Bull in this new role. So I still get to see plenty of them. Obviously a lot of them are friends, so I talk to them and I see them outside of work. So there's a little bit of just missing the camaraderie of being away with the team and in that unit. It was very much my life for so many years, right? Last year I think I spent more days with my teammates than I did my family. So it's been a big change. So I miss certain aspects of it, but this new role has been incredible for me. So it's been amazing to be able to branch out, learn new things, and at times be a little bit out of my comfort zone. I think that's when I'm at my best, and when I'm learning new things is, there's times where you throw yourself in the deep end, and those are great experiences. So I've been absolutely loving the new role.
What do you make of all the pit stops? Because obviously it's been a new thing for Red Bull this year, where they've got a wider pool of people doing the pits, and you saw at the start of the season that there were a few errors and it was a bit slow. Are they now back to that kind of well-oiled machine?
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that. Actually, I wasn't aware that this was sort of that public knowledge, that we'd sort of changed, and for the first time in 20 years, mechanics and technicians and engineers, they'll rotate throughout the season to give them that time off. In all my years there, it was, if you were a Red Bull mechanic, it was every race, every test. So it's amazing that the team have sort of, in a way that they needed to try and sort of make it more acceptable for people to come and do these jobs and stay for a long time. For staff retention, it was really important. Obviously the team knew that was going to have effects operationally, and it was going to take some time to settle into that, and having new people in pit stops was always going to be a challenge. But again, it was one of those things that, Red Bull have never been afraid of a challenge, right? Or doing things differently and making change where they needed to make it. So it's been a learning process for the crew. The goal, I think, at the beginning of the season was just to find consistency. For us, going and chasing world record pit stops, it was more of a pride thing than a necessity. And as much as we love doing that, we also recognize the need for change. So I think for us to be able to find what we seem to have, especially towards the latter end of this season, is some really good consistency in the stops, even when crew are rotating, has been really promising.
I wanted to go back to Max. You talk a bit about how he's sort of changed over the years and this more sort of complete. But what's he like? Like, what's he like out of the car? Max, the person, the character.
It's so hard, because I think when you see somebody that gets in a race car and is so efficient and dominant and driven, it's very quick to imagine that they're like that all the time, right? And that must just be them all the time. It's not the case. I think we're really lucky in that Max, when we get the opportunity, especially to interact with him outside the garage, when we go to dinner and stuff like that, he is a great human, as you put it, and he's wonderful. And we try and spend our time when we're with him, talking about stuff that's other than racing, family man himself now. And he's always been great at asking us how we're getting on with our families and all of the things that we're going through in the garage and stuff like that. So it's been an amazing relationship. He has a very, very good relationship with his crew and everybody in the garage. It's been a real pleasure.
It's fun when he takes you out for those meals. I know he's partial to the odd gin and tonic. I'm not sure whether that's so much race weekend or not.
It kind of depends what day of the week the meal's on, right? So, if you get to go out early in the week on like a Wednesday night and stuff like that, then obviously you've got a little bit more room to have a good time. But when it's a Saturday night, we all try and sort of just really enjoy the meal and the time. But also there's always going to be that in the back of the mind of making sure that you're ready for race day.
I can't remember what race it was after, but I went to a team debrief one time, and he came back, at the factory, and he came on the screen admitting he'd had 5 gin and tonics, but I think it may have been even more. He wasn't looking at his best. That was post race, so it's acceptable.
Well, good for him, yeah.
You obviously had nearly a kind of decade, I guess, at Red Bull,
yeah,
and some incredible sort of success over that period of time because of how that team is. What's the sort of Red Bull secret? What makes the team so special?
I think one of the things that stands out to me, and like I said, winning is always going to be multifaceted. You need the car, you need the right people, but for me, it's always going to be the people side of the business that I think is special, especially I think in comparison to maybe some of our competitors. I think you can have all the tech, all the innovation, all of these things, all the infrastructure you like. It's people that make that happen, right? And it's the attitude and the mentality and the personalities of those people, because it's not just about having the people with the right skills. I think something that Red Bull's been particularly good at over the years is hiring the right personalities for the right roles, right? And it creates an environment that's very different to anywhere else I've worked, right? I think it's probably, and I often say that it kind of has the environment and the closeness of a small business, but it's a massive business, right? And everything becomes really personal. And when you do that and you personalize your work, because ultimately everybody's there for the love of racing, right? And for me, not just racing in the big picture, but I loved what I did and it suited my personality. And I think when you've put so many people like that in those roles, you just get this, it's almost like a force. It's hard to describe, but like a shared drive and a shared vision. And the willingness to do whatever it takes is so much more prevalent when you have this mentality and this closeness among the people in the business. Like, there's not many other places that I've worked where a chief mechanic could call me up on 3 PM on a Sunday while I'm in the middle of a roast and say, Cal, I need you to do me a favor and come to the factory and build an engine for the dyno because we've had a failure. But, my chief mechanic, Phil, he knew that he could have called me at any time and I would have done that stuff. And it's that personal relationship with not just the work, but the people you're working with that could be really special. And that's the thing that's always stood out to me about Red Bull.
Having had a chance to have a sort of insight into the team, it feels a bit like a family sometimes. Admittedly, sometimes slightly a dysfunctional one at points.
It often sounds really cheesy, and you can get a lot of stick for calling businesses families, but there's very little other way to describe it. That closeness. I always think back to my very first year at Red Bull, right? So as you said, I've been there 10 years, and in all of those years, I've only ever had one not so positive performance review. Right. And it was my very first year at the team. And basically what happened was I went into this super nervous. I joined from Marussia, obviously a backmarker team, and I joined Red Bull off the back of their 4 world championships. And I was so nervous about it that I went into the business with a mentality of I'm just going to do my work really well and focus on just that. And I'm not going to get involved in anything else. Right. And I thought I'd done a brilliant job of that. And to be fair, I kind of had. But I got to my performance review and I sat down with my chief mechanic and he said, Cal, you're a great mechanic, technician. You're doing a really good job. All of your work's top notch, but you haven't gelled with your teammates. And I didn't understand. And he goes, well, look around you and look at the relationships everybody else has. They all know one another. They're part of something, and you've chosen to sort of separate yourself from that. And it was a new mentality for me. It was something that I hadn't even considered. And I was perfectly capable of doing all of this stuff and being personable, but it was a different mindset from the one that I'd approached it with. And from then on, once I sort of understood it, the relationship became very different. It became, the understanding of the team became so different for me. And I think that, going forward, it was a big part of my success as well.
Like when maybe 2021 is the best example, but when you're in, as a mechanic, when you're in a battle like that, the intensity of that going down to the sort of last race and stuff, how intense is that? It's pretty full on, isn't it? Those last few weeks and maybe the whole season, probably.
I mean, that season in particular, I feel like it was from the summer break onwards. It just felt like this mounting thing, right? Like it's just constantly building week on week. And then, to that climax in Abu Dhabi, I think I said about 2021, I said in my book that it was the first time that the sport, I really struggled to leave my work behind me, right? So I always have a mentality that, you're going to have good days, bad days in racing. That's what it is. Each day I always say to myself, the garage door closes and that's it. It's a new day tomorrow. And I think 2021 was the first time where like you really felt like you did take it all home with you, right? Like you get back from a long haul flight, things hadn't gone well or not as well as you'd hoped. And it was the first time in my career that I really struggled to use those few days at home to sort of recuperate and forget about it all and go into the next weekend sort of fresh. And it felt towards the end of that season, it very much felt like you were home for no time at all. And before you knew it, you were back on the plane and going to the garage with the same stresses. And it felt like it was never ending. I think I talk about the end of Abu Dhabi, and despite all the controversy and all of that stuff. For me, at the end of Abu Dhabi, after all of that, before the joy of winning a championship, I sat on the pit wall at the end of the race, and I think my first feeling was like relief. I was like, oh my God, we've made it through. It's the end of the season. And then afterwards it was like, okay. And we've also, for me, it's the first time I'd won a world championship. But I think initially that feeling was just relief.
That's bonkers. To talk about the book, Life in the Pit Lane, like, was that an enjoyable experience to put down on paper? We talk about 2021, but like those remarkable highs, and I'm sure there's been some lows as well. Was it
Yeah.
a fun, cathartic kind of experience? Or
Yeah, I mean, certainly in some aspects it was a little bit cathartic, like I think you have all of these things that you've learned, and you've sort of all this knowledge and all this sort of insight into the sport that you have, and realistically you kind of feel like you've got no one to tell it to, right?
yeah,
Like like my friends are all sick of hearing it, but at the same time they were the ones who said to me, look, Cal, you've got all these great stories as well as some really like useful insight for people who love the sport. Why have you ever thought about writing a book? And it kind of came out of nowhere for me. Like I'd been doing some writing for something else that I was doing, and I just kind of carried on writing about the sport. And then I mentioned it to my manager in like a passing conversation. And about a week later, she called me up and she was like, oh, Calum, I want to introduce you to this literary agent, Oscar. He's fantastic. And I was like, right, okay. And then like a few days later, Oscar said, oh, I've put together all that writing that you showed Francesca. And I thought we could, we got a proposal for a great book here. And then I was like, right, okay, I hadn't really considered this at this point. And then honestly, it was so soon after that I was sat in meetings with publishers, sitting there thinking, oh my God, am I actually going to write a book? But it was an amazing experience. I absolutely loved it. There were some bits that I thought were really nice for me to be able to give people insight that they wouldn't have got elsewhere. Especially like the art of the pit stop was an easy chapter to write for me. It's probably the thing that I love most about the sport. But then, I talk about my time at Marussia that wasn't always great, being a backmarker team with no money. And obviously then going through what we went through with Jules Bianchi. Those were some bits that were really hard to write about, and they sort of, again, like I said earlier, I don't really mind sometimes being a little bit uncomfortable. I feel like it's where I get the best out of myself. So some of those bits that were harder to write are the bits that I'm really proud of. But as an overall experience, it was fantastic. It was difficult at times. I spent a lot of time when my colleagues were out going to the bar at the circuit after leaving the circuit, and I'd just be sat in my hotel room trying to get some done, and then airport lounges and long haul flights. So it was difficult at times, but it was an amazing experience.
I was thinking about your book when I was in the paddock yesterday, about the sort of diversity element that's obviously been a big push for you. And I don't know whether it's being naive on my part, but there does seem to be a shift in the right direction in that regard in the paddock, or maybe not.
No, look, I think firstly, the one thing I do say is that the paddock is a really small snapshot of the industry.
Yeah.
I think especially when you look at teams, right? You got your 60 operational personnel in a business of thousands. So it doesn't really give you a clear idea of where we're at. But, we have seen improvement. We have seen a shift towards more people applying for these roles, and therefore people hiring for these roles have a wider pool of people to look at their skills and say, oh, this person could be a great fit for this job. This was never about just trying to make the paddock look a certain way. This was about encouraging a lot more people to consider opportunities in this industry. But this shift that we've seen, it is only through, people using their voices, and Lewis Hamilton being one of those voices. Probably the most important in terms of starting this conversation. And now a lot of other people who are working towards creating communities and then devising initiatives that are just attracting more people to this industry. So it's amazing to see.
I was going to say then, it's obviously not the finished article where it's at now. Like, what more does the sport teams perhaps need to do in that regard?
Well, I mean, I think it's amazing. I think one of the biggest barriers that we had, right, when we first started looking at these issues within the whole industry, because it's not just Formula One, it's motorsport as a whole. And in fact, my experience of Formula One is that it's more diverse than many junior level motorsports, certainly in the UK. But, I think one of the big barriers that we overcame in the first place is that we didn't even understand, teams didn't have the data of who made up their organizations. right? So it's, in a sport where we're so driven by data and things like this,
Mm.
it was kind of like weird that a lot of these teams, they didn't even know the makeup of their own businesses really. So that was one of the first barriers that we overcame. And when I look at where we go on from now, there are so many great initiatives that are driving more people. We've seen this fan base grow into one that's we're nearly 50% women as fans of Formula One now. So to see the fan base grow, we're now looking, to find ways to make sure that the industry that they enjoy is one that they might consider taking up careers in. That's not necessarily to say they will, but
Mhm.
there are plenty more ways, and some of them are really small. Some of them are really small things that you hadn't considered. I sat in a meeting the other day where we were talking about making infrastructure more inclusive, right? And I was talking to someone who remembered being heavily pregnant, working at a business where all of the car parking spaces were so small that she used to have to arrive at work really early so that she could get out of her car before anyone was parked next to her, and then she'd leave super late. And these are really small things that you'd never consider that would be, essentially making it really hard for people to work in a place. So some of the things that we do as businesses within the sport are not necessarily big visuals, because big visuals are rarely useful. This is about the small things, making the sport more accessible and more inclusive to everybody.
If I go back to Red Bull and the team, like obviously they've got a new boss, not the boss you knew under your time in Laurent. Have you noticed a change under Laurent of the team? Is it a different approach, and how different to the Christian Horner approach?
Um, Look, it's hard to say, to be honest. I've managed to sit down with Laurent. Recently, we filmed a podcast together not too long ago, and one of the things that stood out to me about Laurent is just that it's very rare to find somebody who has this innate engineering knowledge and know-how, like this person who knows a lot of the technical side of the sport, but is also an incredible people person. That's something that stood out to me about Laurent, from day one, was that as a people person, he's brilliant. And I think it was perfect for what we needed at the time. Um, it's hard to say how that differs, because, as I said, those relationships that Laurent has with other senior management are not ones that I'm involved in, right? So I don't want to speculate on it, but it certainly stood out to me in my time with Laurent that it seems very rare, and we're very lucky to have somebody who does have this technical knowledge that can help lead design and engineering teams, but also is an excellent communicator,
Mm.
right? And as well as that, he's really warm and really approachable, and that fits with the ethos of the team really well. So I think it's exciting going forward.
And what was Christian like as a boss then? I mean, obviously he had great success in his time there.
Look, I had a good relationship with Christian. I say that there's not many team bosses in this sport that would allow one of their mechanics to build a social media profile and then go and release a book and then go on to be an ambassador for the team. And that was what I was allowed to do. Christian was good at seeing the benefit that I was providing both to the business and for the sport, and he was very supportive. So in my relationship was great in that sense.
Well, what about next season? We know that Max is obviously driving for the team next season, and probably Isaac Hadjar. I don't know if that is the case. If Isaac gets that drive, do you think that's the right call in your
I'm
eyes?
going to be honest with you, Matt. I absolutely have no idea. It's not something that I in any way get on with. Look, in this role, I've got to do so many great things, right? Working across projects that the business do, seeing stuff that's outside of the race team. Like I've really enjoyed things like STEMX this year, right? And going out into schools with Milton Keynes College. I got to be honest with you, the driver market, it's just not part of my sort of purview.
Well, one thing might again not be in your kind of headspace, but chatting to the guys and girls still there, we got 2026 is like a big thing with the new power unit in house and stuff, and there's quite a lot of excitement about that. What's key for Red Bull to get spot on with that to hit the ground running next season?
Well, look, I think it's a huge project, right? You're taking on seasoned engine manufacturers in a sport where there's very little room for error, and I think that they will expect it to be a project that needs work. I don't think anyone's expecting to go out there and win every race at the beginning of the season, right? I think Helmut spoke about it not long ago, that this is something that we want to find reliability. We want to start off the season with a project that we feel that we can continue to build and develop on, right? For me, I think it's really exciting. I can't imagine many other businesses that would take on such a thing as a non-car manufacturer to decide to take on this project. Is brave, and it perfectly suits sort of the Red Bull mentality, right? Do things differently, don't necessarily stay in your lane, right? Go and do something that will be a huge risk, but if we can get it right, it will have huge benefits for us for a long time going forward.
And we started with Max, and I was going to end with Max again. I guess when you were there, you had uncertainty of his future. People were saying he was going to go there, and we again saw it this season. Do you kind of see long term that he'll stay on beyond next season?
I mean, my hope is always that I hope so, right? Again, I don't
Yeah.
have that kind of insight into what Max or the team do, but my experience has been an absolute joy working with him. So that's what I always say is that, I think Max has said it before about, where he wants to finish his career at the team. And I think that would be amazing. I think it'd be an incredible legacy. He's been wonderful for the team in our own growth. And I think that we've been an incredible positive impact on him and to allow him to grow into the driver that he is as well. So yeah, I think it's a relationship that we want to always keep going.
Is he the greatest, or
Yeah,
there will ever be,
no,
or nearly there?
I agree, and I think Max has said this himself. I think it's really, really difficult to compare drivers from different eras, right? But it's absolutely clear to me that this is, and as I'm sure plenty of other broadcasters have said before, he's a generational talent. It is very unlikely that we're going to see somebody with that raw talent that can grow and go on to do the things that Max has done and become as complete as he has. Like there have been plenty of drivers that have this raw skill, but it's putting it all together. And I think that Max's drive, his love of racing in particular, is something that will always just stand out. To say the greatest, yeah, right now I'm happy to sit here and say Max is the greatest. But with that proviso that it is very, very difficult to make these comparisons across eras and different cars and different types of racing. Formula One's evolution, it's required different things from your skills, right? So it is very hard to make that comparison. But right now, there's no doubt in my mind that Max Verstappen is the best driver on the grid.
Lovely. Well, thanks, Calum. I really appreciate you joining us. And just before you hop on a plane and head out to your next adventure, isn't it?
Absolutely. I'm really looking forward to it, getting out to the circuit. So yeah, thank you so much for having me.
That's all for this week ahead of the race in Las Vegas on Saturday or early Sunday UK time. We're back on Monday when I'll be joined by Rick Edwards to discuss everything that happened here at this street circuit. Remember to follow us on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, or all three if you fancy. Search for the Inside Track podcast or check out the show notes. The Inside Track is funded and made by BBC Studios, a commercial company that's wholly owned by the BBC. It's produced and edited by John Weeks. Video editing and social media is by Georgina Revel, and James Cook is the executive producer.